Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to consider a judge striking a gavel and saying, I sentence you to 10 years.
Right.
Or, a couple standing at an altar saying, I do.
Yeah, those are heavy moments.
Exactly. Because in those precise moments, words are not merely describing a situation, right? They're altering reality.
Which is what linguists call performative utterances.
Yes, performative utterances. It's
Yeah.
speech that functions as a literal mechanism of change. You utter a phrase, and the legal or social universe just instantly reshuffles itself.
Yeah, it literally shifts around those syllables.
And we accept this power in formal settings. I mean, we understand that a signature on a treaty or a verbal oath carries immense weight, but in the daily churn of our lives, we tend to strip language of that gravity.
We completely do.
We treat everyday conversation like it's just an exhaust fume of consciousness, just a harmless byproduct of passing the time.
And that cognitive dissonance, that's exactly where we begin today. Because we compartmentalize the power of language. We recognize the danger of a signed declaration of war, sure, yet we assume the casual assessment of a colleague's character or, the spontaneous unburdening of a secret just evaporates into the ether.
Like it has no collateral damage.
Exactly. But the source material we are examining today absolutely refuses to grant us that convenient compartmentalization.
It forces a really uncomfortable confrontation with the reality that every syllable we deploy is, it's a vector of force.
It is. And that is the mission for this deep dive.
Yes. Today, we are tearing into Chapter 6 of Albert Pike's source text, Morals and Dogma. The chapter is titled The Intimate Secretary.
And for those of you familiar with the text, this author operates on a level of severe philosophical rigor.
Oh, absolutely. So to give you a quick map of the journey so far, we were moving out of the early chapters. Those earlier parts functioned largely as like an internal boot camp.
Right. They focus on personal discipline.
Yeah, discipline, the pursuit of knowledge, transformation, and the solitary mastery of silence.
Which are things you can master alone in a room.
Exactly. But the intimate secretary drags us out of that isolation. It forces us into the messy, high-stakes architecture of human relationships.
And the central premise here is just staggering. It argues that speech is not a biological reflex. It is the ultimate moral act.
And it is the mechanism by which we either construct or annihilate trust.
Right. So to really appreciate the architecture of this chapter, we have to start by examining the title itself.
The intimate secretary.
Yeah, because the word secretary has been completely diluted in modern parlance.
Oh, for sure. We hear secretary and we think, administrative support, answering phones.
Exactly. But the text uses it in its classical etymological sense. It derives from the medieval Latin secretarius.
The keeper of secrets.
Yes, the confidant to the sovereign. The intimate secretary is the node in a network that processes the most sensitive data.
And the source material positions this figure as someone entrusted with three distinct, incredibly heavy things.
Right, which are the raw words of another, the underlying information those words contain, and the moral responsibility of shielding both.
Which requires a massive epistemological shift in how we view trust. I mean, the text refers to the sacred nature of trust.
Which is a strong phrase.
It is, because we tend to view trust today as just a social lubricant, right? Something we employ to make daily transactions a bit smoother.
Like a convenience.
Exactly. But this text elevates it. If we think about trust through the lens of modern systems, it operates remarkably like a distributed ledger.
Oh, like a cryptographic blockchain.
Yeah, exactly like a blockchain. You don't just build trust in a vacuum. Every single interaction is a verified transaction added to the ledger.
And it takes immense computational energy and time and consistency to mine those blocks.
Right, to secure the chain. You build this intricate house of cards over months or years.
That is a highly precise framework for what the text is describing. A ledger requires a continuous, unbroken chain of verification.
Yes.
And the sacredness it refers to, that's the integrity of that chain. Trust is earned slowly, broken easily, and restored with great difficulty.
But here's the vulnerability of that system. And honestly, this is where I want to push back a little on the demand for us to take on this role.
Okay, let's hear it.
Because in a cryptographic ledger, If a single node goes rogue and introduces a corrupted block.
The whole thing is compromised.
Right. In human terms, if an intimate secretary betrays a confidence, the entire chain is invalidated. It's like a gust of wind knocking over the house of cards.
Yeah, a 51% attack on the network destroys the consensus.
Exactly. The text acknowledges how excruciatingly fragile trust is. It's earned over decades and annihilated in a microsecond of negligence.
That's true.
So, looking at the sheer asymmetry of that risk, why should we participate in the network at all?
What do you mean?
I mean, if trust is so fragile, operating an air-gap system like total emotional and informational isolation, that guarantees security.
That's one way to look at it, sure.
So why step into the role of the intimate secretary and expose yourself to the catastrophic penalty of a compromised ledger? Isn't it safer just to remain isolated and not trust anyone?
Well, the air gap system provides absolute security, yes, but at the cost of absolute stagnation.
Stagnation.
Yeah, because an isolated system cannot process new information. It cannot generate complex value, and the source material addresses this directly.
How so?
What's fascinating here is that the burden of processing another person's reality, that is the only mechanism that generates deep relational bonds.
So the risk is the point.
Exactly. To refuse the role of the intimate secretary out of a fear of failure is to basically reject your own moral potential.
Wow.
The risk isn't a flaw in the system. The risk is the system. Holding the unencrypted vulnerabilities of another person and consciously choosing every single day not to exploit them.
That's the test.
Yes, that is the ultimate crucible of character. Without that severe vulnerability, you don't have loyalty. You just have mutual tolerance.
Okay, that makes sense. So if we accept that we must plug into the network and take on that vulnerability, we have to look really closely at the data packets we are transmitting.
Right, which leads us to the analysis of the tools themselves, our words.
And this is where the source material makes an assertion that directly challenges the cultural norm we've adopted. We like to separate the physical world of actions from the mental world of language.
We do. We treat them as totally distinct.
But the text collapses that distinction entirely. It highlights a surprising takeaway: words are never neutral.
Never. The author is operating on a premise that mirrors modern speech act theory.
Which is?
Well, it demands we view language not as a descriptive overlay on top of reality, but as a tool that shapes reality. Words have the dual nature to build or destroy.
They carry tangible weight.
Exactly. When you speak, you are initiating a physical process. You are literally vibrating the air, hitting another human's tympanic membrane, and instantly triggering a cascade of neurochemical reactions.
Right, like spiking cortisol with a threat.
Or releasing oxytocin with a validation.
Yeah.
You are physically altering the internal state of another biological organism.
That reframes everything. The idea that words are just invisible air is a convenient fiction.
It really is.
But wait, let me bring up the old playground adage. You know, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me.
Oh yeah, the ultimate defense mechanism.
Right, but here's where it gets really interesting, because the text argues the exact opposite. Words do hurt, and they do heal.
Absolutely. If we connect this to the bigger picture, if language acts upon human hardware like executable code, then that sticks and stones defense is intellectually bankrupt.
We just teach it to kids because they lack the emotional armor.
Exactly. But the text is addressing adults here. It is stating that a verbal assault is a tangible assault.
And because it is a tangible assault, this brings us to the destructive force of careless speech.
Yes, careless speech takes on a terrifying dimension in this framework.
If you view speech merely as an expression of internal thought, then saying something thoughtless is just a victimless error.
Right, a minor oops.
But if speech is an action with a defined trajectory and kinetic energy, then speaking carelessly is the moral equivalent of firing a weapon into a crowded room with your eyes closed.
That is a stark analogy, but it's accurate. Claiming you did not intend to hit anyone is utterly irrelevant to the person bleeding out.
The damage is done.
The trajectory of the word, once released, belongs to the physical world, and you are entirely culpable for its impact. Every sentence you utter is an action.
So if words are executable code with the kinetic energy of a physical action, we desperately need an operational manual for deploying them.
We do. You can't hand someone a tool that rewrites reality and just say, try to be nice.
No, we need a rigorous framework, which introduces what the text outlines as the ethical compass of the intimate secretary.
Right, the ethics of communication.
And it is anchored by 3 non-negotiable pillars: honesty, integrity, and discretion.
The interaction between those three pillars is where the true philosophical density of the material lies.
How so?
Well, honesty and integrity are often treated as synonyms, but in this framework, honesty is the raw material. It's the factual accuracy of the data.
Okay.
Integrity is the structural soundness of your character in handling that data.
Yeah.
But discretion, that is the filter.
The epistemological filter.
Exactly. It's the mastery of the paradox of silence. It's the profound realization that the factual truth of a statement does not universally justify its articulation.
That not everything that can be said should be said.
Precisely. It distinguishes between speaking truthfully and causing unnecessary harm.
I want to pose a practical dilemma for you, the listener, because this borders on controversial. Let's look at this through the lens of modern philosophical debate.
Okay.
You have thinkers today advocating for radical honesty. The idea that any withholding of truth, even a polite white lie, introduces friction and manipulates reality.
Sure. That's a popular stance.
So imagine you are the intimate secretary and you possess a piece of information that is 100% true about a confidant.
Okay. I have the data.
But you know that sharing it would only cause them psychological ruin without offering any constructive value. Radical honesty dictates you must deliver the data. So what does this all mean? Is keeping quiet a lie of omission, or is it ethical restraint? If you withhold it, aren't you playing God with their perception of reality?
That is a really compelling utilitarian argument. But the source text operates on a different moral frequency.
Okay, unpack that.
The radical honesty framework assumes that truth is the highest absolute good, regardless of the destruction it leaves in its wake.
Right.
But the concept of discretion here argues that truth without wisdom is simply brutality disguised as virtue.
Brutality disguised as virtue. Wow, that is a sharp critique.
It is.
We often see people use honesty to absolve themselves of the psychological burden of holding a secret. They detonate the information and wash their hands, saying, "Oh, I'm just being honest."
While the other person absorbs all the shrapnel.
Exactly.
Discretion is the willingness to bear the burden of the unsaid. In your scenario, delivering a highly destructive, fundamentally useless truth is not an act of integrity.
It's an act of emotional offloading.
Exactly. The intimate secretary must have the fortitude to absorb the friction of that secret. Silence, in this context, is not a lie of omission. It's a proactive, highly calibrated ethical restraint.
It's recognizing that the purpose of communication isn't just the relentless purging of facts.
Right. It's the moral stewardship of the relationship, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent.
Okay, so discretion requires an incredible degree of psychological endurance. But let's turn the dial up on this stress test.
Let's do it.
What happens when the silence isn't protecting someone from useless pain, but protecting them from accountability? This brings us to the crucible of loyalty. The ethical compass we are discussing faces catastrophic failure when principles collide.
Specifically, when your loyalty to a person directly conflicts with your loyalty to objective truth.
Yes. When should you protect someone, and when should you speak honestly?
This is the ultimate stress fracture in any intimate relationship. And the text addresses this tension head-on by redefining loyalty entirely.
By contrasting principled loyalty with blind loyalty.
Right. It strips away the tribalistic, unconditional loyalty that society often romanticizes and replaces it with a rigorous, principled loyalty.
We have a deep cultural sickness around this, honestly. I want to push back against modern pop culture definitions of loyalty.
You mean the ride or die mentality?
Yes. The friend who covers up your mistakes no matter what. If someone is in your tribe, your job is to defend their actions, obscure their failures, and validate their reality, no matter how divergent it is from the truth.
And if you correct someone in your inner circle, you're branded a traitor.
Exactly. It's an expectation of complicity masquerading as friendship. But the source material demands a much harder, more uncomfortable standard of duty.
Because tribal loyalty is rooted in self-preservation. It's a primitive evolutionary mechanism to ensure the survival of the group.
Right.
But the text demands an evolution beyond biology. A tribal loyalist protects the ego and the immediate comfort of their confidant.
But the intimate secretary.
The intimate secretary, guided by principled loyalty, protects the moral alignment of their confidant. This raises an important question. How do you resolve that tension?
What's the ultimate conclusion?
True loyalty is inextricably bound to truth and justice. True loyalty might mean confronting someone with a hard truth, rather than shielding them with a comforting lie.
Which means the role of the intimate secretary isn't to be a shield, It's to be a mirror.
A mirror, yes.
If I am truly loyal to you and I observe you engaging in an action that decays your character or harms others, providing a comforting lie is a betrayal of my duty.
Precisely. Principled loyalty requires the courage to induce severe, short-term cognitive dissonance in the person you care about for the sake of their long-term moral integrity.
You have to be willing to risk the relationship to save the character of the individual.
Yes. If you lack the fortitude to look your confidant in the eye and deliver a harsh, necessary truth, you are not an intimate secretary. You are an enabler.
You are an enabler. Wow, that standard forces us to entirely reevaluate our inner circles. Are we surrounded by intimate secretaries, or are we surrounded by enablers?
It's a tough audit to perform.
It is. And having established this high bar of principled loyalty, the discussion naturally turns to the ultimate failure state.
Carelessness.
Yes. We have to examine the dark side of communication. The text has some incredibly strong warnings against gossip, betrayal, and reckless speech.
It treats gossip not as a minor social faux pas, but as a profound moral corruption. To understand why it's condemned so severely, we have to look at the anatomy of a ruined relationship.
How the cascading effects work.
Exactly. We have to look at how gossip functions within a social network, how it destroys trust and creates lasting harm.
It functions exactly like informational entropy. If we look at evolutionary psychology, gossip actually served a primitive purpose.
Oh, Robin Dunbar's theory.
Yes, the anthropologist Robin Dunbar. He suggested that gossip is the human equivalent of social grooming in primates. It's how we map alliances and build cohesion in large groups.
So we are biologically wired to crave inside information.
Absolutely. It feels good to possess a secret and deploy it, right? It triggers a dopamine response because it elevates our status within the tribe.
And that biological impulse is precisely what the text demands we conquer. Gossip introduces a corrupted packet of data into the social network.
It's reckless.
It is. When an intimate secretary succumbs to the urge to share an unverified rumor or a private failure, they initiate an information cascade.
Like a genetic mutation in a virus.
Exactly. The information replicates, it distorts with each transmission, and it infects the trust architecture of the entire community.
I like to compare reckless communication to a wildfire. Once the spark is lit, once the gossip is shared, or the careless comment is made, the speaker entirely loses control of what the fire burns down.
That's a perfect analogy.
You might share a piece of sensitive information thinking it will only go to one trusted node, but you have fundamentally breached the cryptography. You've proven the ledger can be altered.
And the stance on this is terrifyingly strict. The text asserts that the damage caused by this negligence is treated with the exact same moral severity as intentional malice.
Which feels harsh, but when you think about it,
The outcome dictates the severity. If an information cascade destroys a person's reputation, their livelihood, or their mental stability, the origin point of that cascade cannot hide behind the defense of, well, I was just making conversation.
right, negligence is mathematically indistinguishable from malice in its end-stage result.
Exactly. The text calls for extreme restraint. The intimate secretary must act as a terminal node for entropy. When destructive, unverified information reaches them, it must die with them.
They must operate as an absolute firewall.
Yes, they have to actively train themselves against the very human impulse to share harmful information.
This requires fighting our own neurochemistry every single day.
It really does.
And the restraint required to be that firewall brings us to the ultimate synthesis of the philosophy in this chapter. Discretion isn't merely a defensive tactic to avoid causing harm.
No, it fundamentally shapes and ultimately reveals the speaker's true self.
Let's tackle that concept of discretion again, because
Yeah.
it's redefining discretion, right?
Yes, the source argues that discretion is not secrecy for its own sake. Rather, it is defined as wisdom in action.
Wisdom in action. I love that.
It's not a passive state of just being quiet. It is an active, dynamic engagement with the world where you are constantly running sophisticated moral calculations.
Like, is this true? Is this necessary?
Exactly. What is the second and third order consequence of releasing this information?
Yeah.
This continuous computational effort is what shapes the architecture of your mind.
It's the ultimate mirror. The crowning argument of the chapter is that how we speak reveals exactly who we are.
It is the realization that your character is not defined by your internal thoughts.
Which is a relief because we all have chaotic, uncharitable, or reckless thoughts.
I do. But character, in this framework, is the delta between what you think and what you permit yourself to say. Our words are an inescapable X-ray of our internal discipline, our values, and our intentions.
You cannot claim to possess a disciplined, principled mind if your external communication is constantly reactive and careless.
You can't. So what does this all mean for you, the listener?
Yeah, how is the intimate secretary judged?
They are judged not merely by the volume of what they know. The volume of their knowledge grants them no moral high ground. They are judged entirely by the grace, the accuracy, and the extreme restraint of how they communicate.
It means every conversation is a public display of your inner moral character.
The sum of your restrained actions becomes your identity.
That is a staggering metric by which to measure a life. It means that every casual email, every text thread, every offhand remark at a dinner party is a public audit of your moral center.
It is an excruciatingly high bar.
So as we wrap up our analysis of Chapter 6, I want to throw some reflective questions directly to you, drawn right from the text.
These are important to consider.
Examine the architecture of your own relationships. Do your words build trust or weaken it? Are you mindful of what you say and how you say it? Do you treat the vulnerabilities entrusted to you as a sacred ledger, or do you treat them as currency to be traded for social status?
Are you acting as a firewall against entropy, or are you a super spreader of careless speech?
Exactly. And when faced with difficult truths, do you choose silence, honesty, or avoidance? When loyalty demands it, do you possess the fortitude to induce cognitive dissonance in those you love, or do you retreat into the complicity of the ride or die tribe?
The path of the intimate secretary is the path of responsible communication. It requires constant vigilance against our own evolutionary impulses.
It's the only path that yields a trust robust enough to withstand human interaction.
And this rigorous moral accounting does not stop here. In our next deep dive, we will be transitioning into Chapter 7.
Ah, the Provost and Judge.
Yes, where justice returns in a new form. Having established the ethics of personal loyalty and communication, we will scale these concepts up to the societal level. We'll be focusing on fairness, the heavy burden of leadership, and moral judgment.
That transition from intimate trust to systemic justice is going to require a whole new framework. It's going to be intense.
Very intense.
But before we leave today, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought to ponder on your own.
A provocative contradiction, really.
Yes. The source material was written in the 19th century, right? A time when communication was deliberate, physical, and agonizingly slow.
You had to write a letter, seal it, and wait weeks.
Exactly. But today, we exist in an algorithmic landscape designed by behavioral psychologists specifically to dismantle the virtues of the intimate secretary.
They monetize our lack of restraint.
Social media platforms, the 24-hour news cycle, the gamification of outrage, they reward the instantaneous, thoughtless deployment of language. So if the source material is right, if true discretion reflects mature wisdom and our words reveal our character, how do we practice the virtues of the intimate secretary in a modern world that is constantly pressuring us to react, overshare, and speak instantly?
How do you maintain the discipline of the firewall in a digital ecosystem that actively pays you to burn it down?
That is the ultimate question for our time. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Speak carefully, act with integrity, and remember, your words shape